I'm delighted that you're here, and I hope you've got your Bible with you and are eager to take that and study with us. And before we get into our study, just remind you 2 weeks away, we're beginning our gospel meeting with Heath Rogers. Heath is an excellent speaker. Perhaps you've heard him in the area before, but I want to mention the fact that Monday through Thursday primarily is going to be Monday through Friday of that week is primarily going to be first principle, lessons that will pertain to your non-Christian friends and family that you may want to invite. You want to get them to come. So make your plans for inviting your friends and family to come to those studies. On Sunday, we'll have lessons prepared for the Christian, for their encouragement, but non-Christians primarily is the focal point Monday through Friday. Come back and be a part of that. Bring your friend and neighbor. Let's talk about questions that are found in the Bible, or questions about Bible themes. Questions are asked for various reasons. Sometimes questions are asked because we are looking for information. We don't know the answer to it, and so we're seeking some information from that. Sometimes questions are asked to emphasize a point. We're not looking for a response. We're trying to emphasize something by the question we ask. Sometimes we ask a question to provoke thought. We want others to think about something, so we raise a question. Again, we're not looking for an answer to that, but maybe we're just looking for some thought to be provoked. Sometimes questions are asked by God in the Bible, where God asks man questions. Sometimes men ask questions of God. Sometimes they ask it of one another. And sometimes we need to ask questions of ourselves. Some questions are not worth asking. That is, there are some questions that probably shouldn't be asked. They're not even worth raising. But there are questions that are worth asking, and that's where I want us to focus tonight. Let's talk about questions worth asking. We're going to look at some questions that were asked by God. We'll look at some questions that were asked by men, and then we're going to look at some questions that we need to ask of ourselves. So let's talk about questions worth asking. Let's look at some questions that were raised or asked by God. Let's go in 2 Kings chapter 20, if you will, and in verse 15. And we have another passage on the screen which is the parallel account to that, because the prophet Isaiah is involved here, and he tells us the same story in his account, in his prophecy in Isaiah 39. We'll not read both accounts. But in 2 Kings chapter 20, Hezekiah's life had been extended. Hezekiah is the king, and he receives an envoy from Babylon, and the text tells us that he displayed everything basically that he had. Their purpose for coming was trying to form an alliance against Assyria. They're not trying to show favor toward Hezekiah. They're trying to form some kind of alliance. And so he displays all that he has and shows them basically everything that he has. And so he is asked, Isaiah the prophet, verse 14 comes and asks him, what is it that you've done? Where were they from? Where'd they come from? And he said, what have they seen? At verse 15, what have they seen in your house? Isaiah 39 in verse 4 raises the same question. That's a good question. That's worth asking. What have they seen in your house? And God could be asking you the same question. Now, he's probably not asking, what did you show to the Babylonian envoy? Did you show them everything? Were they trying to form? That's not the question God would be asking you. You're not under the same circumstance that Hezekiah was under. But God very well could ask, what are people seeing in your house? That's a good question, isn't it? If someone takes a peek into your house and sees your home and your family life, what would they see? Would they see people that really love and care about each other, like Ephesians 5 describes, where the husband loves his wife, even as himself, even as Christ also loved the church? Would they see a wife that reverences her husband, verse 33? What would they see in your house? If they looked in your house, would they see people who make the family first and foremost above everything else except for God? Would they see someone who's trying to rear and train their family and their children in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord? If they looked into your house, would they see who the real leader is? Would they see the husband as the leader, as Ephesians 5, the husband is the head of the wife? Or would they actually see, if they could see into your house and you showed them everything that the wife is actually the leader, or in some cases, the children are in charge. If they were to look into your house, would they see successful communication, or would they see chaos? Where on the surface, the rest of us think things are going well. If we could look into your house, would we see successful communication? Where you're dwelling according to the principle of Matthew 19:6, that you're one flesh, you communicate well with each other. And that is, you talk about things and you blend your minds together as if you had one heart and one mind. If people could look into your house, what would they see? Would they see discipline and restraint? Would they see children that misbehave and yet the rod is driving it far from them? Proverbs 22 and in verse 15. Would they see a wife that is a keeper at home? Would they see that in your home? Or is it utter chaos at your house? That's a good question, isn't it? That's a question God raised through the prophet Isaiah. What have they seen in your house? Here's another question God raised. Let's go this time to Jeremiah chapter 27. We have another prophet this time raises a question, this time in Jeremiah chapter 27 and in verse 13. As we come to the end of the time of the kingdom of Judah, Babylon is now taking over and taking them captive, and God had urged the people and the leaders and the king to submit themselves to the king of Babylon and don't resist. And so we begin at Jeremiah 27 and in verse 12. Jeremiah spoke to Zedekiah the king and said, "Bring your necks under the yoke of the king of Babylon. Don't resist, don't fight him. Because," and I'm going to paraphrase, "if you do, there's consequences. You'll end up dying over this." So he raises the question at verse 13, "Why will you die? Why will you die?" That's a good question. That's worth asking, isn't it? Why will you die? In other words, you resist the king of Babylon, what's going to happen is you're going to get killed and you're going to die. So why will you die when God is telling you through the prophet Jeremiah, submit to the king? Let him take you captive, because that's what's going to happen. That's exactly what God had prophesied. Let's raise that question in a different sense from a spiritual standpoint. Why would you die spiritually? Why would you stay separated from God when you could be given a way of life? Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." Why would you die? Why would you stay separated from God when you have an opportunity to be saved? 2 Corinthians 6 and verse 2 said that the time of salvation is now. That is, this is the time when you have the opportunity. Now it's made available to us. Why would you die when it's available? Salvation and life is available. Why would you die when God begs you to live? Romans 10:21 pictures God with his arms outstretched, begging and pleading. All day long I've stretched forth my hands unto a disobedient and gainsaying people. He's begging for you to come to life. Why would you die? What a question. Here's another question, this time in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5. Jesus in his preaching in Matthew chapter 5 raises a very powerful question at the end of chapter 5. And here he's talking about loving your enemies. And what I want you to notice is that as he talks about loving your enemies and blessing those who curse you, and that's the sense in which we are to be perfect even as God is perfect. That is, you're good to all, both the evil and the good. And then he says at verse 47, if you greet your brethren only, that is, if you only love those that love you back, here's the question he asks, what do you more than others? That's a good question, isn't it? That's worth asking. What do you do more than others? God asked that question. Notice in the context, how much better are you than the hypocrite? Look at verse 46. He said, if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? You see, the hypocrite loves those that love them. They don't do any better than that. So how are you any better than the hypocrite? What do you more than others? Well, let's raise that question even from another standpoint. How much better are you than the half-hearted? Do you do any more than those? There are Christians who give a half-hearted effort in living their Christian life. What do you more than others? Are you doing more than that? That's a good question, isn't it? How much better are we than those who do whatever they want to do? Do you know some Christians who don't really conform their lives to the will of God, but they do whatever they want to do and live however they want to live? How much more or how much better are you than them? How much more do you than others? What do you more than others? How are you showing that you're living above the world? Are you just like the rest of the world? And if someone could look at you and look at the world, would they see a difference in that? How much more do you than others? What do you do more than others? Powerful question. Let's look at another question that Jesus asked, and this time in John 6, in verse 67. But verse 66 sets the pace for that question. At this juncture, this is a turning point in the ministry of Jesus. And what we mean by that in John chapter 6, this turning point comes because verse 56 says, or 66 tells us something that happened. Now, previous to this, great throngs of people have been gathering and following. We're seeing that in Mark. We saw that in Matthew. And here in John, the same story is going. Great throngs of people have been following Jesus. They're interested in His miracles, perhaps even interested somewhat in His teaching. They're interested in seeing the things that He does. Now in John 6 verse 66, from that time, many of His disciples, this is the great throng of people, went back and walked no more with Him. In other words, the majority turned aside and they went astray. Now verse 67, then Jesus said to the 12, do you also want to go away? That's a good question, isn't it? It must be, because God asked that. Do you also want to go away? Do you also want to leave? The rest of the crowd left. Most of the people left. This was a turning point. Do y'all want to go too? That's worth asking, isn't it? You see, some people leave because they're not interested in spiritual things. You know of people that once showed some interest in spiritual things. They once went to church. They once studied their Bibles. They tried to live godly. And they lost interest in spiritual things and they turned and walked no more with Him. Do you also want to go? There are some people who turn away because they're discouraged. Maybe they discouraged themselves. Maybe they felt discouraged by other people. And they turned and they walked no more with Him. Do you also want to go? There are some people who leave and they've gone because they want to continue the practice of their sin. They like what they're doing that's contrary to the will of God. They don't like God's requirements, so they're going to do whatever they want to do. They want to continue in their sinful ways. Do you also want to go with them? You see, that's what Jesus is asking, isn't it? What will happen to you when the crowd turns away, when the majority of the world turns against Him, when maybe the majority of your own brethren turn against Him? Do you also want to go astray? Powerful question to ask. Let's go to Luke chapter 6. Here's another question that God asked. Our Lord Jesus raised this question. This is in Luke's account of the Sermon on the Mount, in Luke chapter 6 and in verse 46. And He said, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not the things which I say? That's a question worth asking. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not the things which I say? The word Lord means ruler. That's not merely a title that let's call Him Lord because that's the title, like He's a mister or He's a sir. Lord means ruler. And so why do you call Him ruler if you don't let Him rule your life? That's the question Jesus is asking. That's worth asking that. So why do you call Jesus your Lord if you're not going to let Him rule? Do you let Him rule your family life? In other words, do you make Him the king and you say, whatever the king wants me to do, I'm going to let Him rule and govern our family life. So whatever He says about the family, that's what I want Him to rule. I'm going to let Him rule. Do you let Him rule your thoughts? Do you let Him control your thoughts? That I need to clear these thoughts out of my mind because the ruler said I don't need to think that way. And here's an attitude I need to get out of my mind because the king says I'm not to think that. Do you change your thoughts because of the king? Do you let Him rule your personal godliness? Or you let Him control your life, your personal godliness? Do you let Him rule in your business life? Do you conduct your business according to the rule of the king? Do you let Him rule in your school life? Do you conduct yourself at school like the king wants you to conduct yourself? Do you conduct yourself in your daily life like the king wants you to conduct yourself? Good question, isn't it? Why do you call me Lord? Why do you call me your ruler if you're not going to let me rule? That's the question that He's asking. Let's go again to Matthew chapter 6. Let's look at another question. Matthew chapter 6 and in verse 27. This is also in the Sermon on the Mount. This is in Matthew's account, the fuller account of that Sermon on the Mount. And as he talks about materialism, notice at verse 27, he said, which of you by worrying can add 1 cubit to his stature? Which of you by worrying can add 1 cubit to his stature? That's a good question. Now, what does it mean by worry? It has to do with anxiety. Your translation may use the word anxiety or anxious. Thayer says that means to be troubled with cares. You're just weighted down and burdened with cares. You're overly concerned about material things. By the way, this is in the context of materialism. Let's back up just a little bit in the context and notice beginning at verse 19. Do I not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and thieves break through and steal? Verse 21, where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Look at verse 24, you cannot love God and mammon. In that context of materialism, he then launches off to another form of materialism. Beginning at verse 25, he said, do not worry about your life, what you'll eat or what you'll drink. That's a form of materialism again. So which of you by worrying can add 1 cubit to his stature? In other words, what good does it do? The cubic has to do with the distance of a mile marker. That is, it's the mile of life he's talking about, not your height. But which of you by worrying can add anything to the length of his life? It doesn't do any good. You don't even add 18 inches to the distance you're going to run in life by worrying. It does no good. It's useless. Cast your cares upon him because he cares for you. Let's go again now to one of the Gospels, this time to Mark chapter 8. Mark chapter 8 and in verse 36, where Jesus is urging his disciples to take up their cross and follow him. Notice at verse 34, we all know well, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. The context is dealing with discipleship and the principle of discipleship and the sacrifice for discipleship. So notice now at verse 36 he said, for what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and lose his own soul? That's a question worth asking, isn't it? What will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and lose his own soul? Here's a verse telling me something about the value of the soul. Your soul is everything to you because that's all you have. You see, all the possessions you have, you're going to leave behind and you're going to lose. Your body you'll leave behind, but you'll take your soul with you because that's all that you have that's yours. And what does it profit you if you gain the whole world and you lost your own soul? What if you gained a great education and you lose your soul? What have you gained? What have you got? And the answer to the question is you've gained nothing. What if you are successful in business and gain sums of money, large sums of money, but you lose your soul? And you say, but I'm a successful business person. Look at the money that I've made. And you lose the only thing that you have. You've lost all that you have. What if you keep your family? You say, well, I love my family. I love the family relationship, and I kept all of it together. And I kept that relationship going with my family. But I lost my soul. What have you gained? Because you're going to lose your family in the end. Ultimately, there is no marriage or giving in marriage in heaven. And if you lose your soul, you've lost everything there is. What if you have a great deal of fun and you enjoy yourself in life and you just really have a good time, even doing things contrary to the will of God, and you lose your soul? What have you gained? That's a powerful question. What does it profit a man if he gain the whole world and then lose his own soul? You see, God asked a number of questions worth asking, or God wouldn't have asked them. But the Bible records a number of questions that men ask that are worth asking. Let's talk about some of those questions. Let's go to Acts chapter 9 and in verse 6. The Lord appeared to Saul on the road to Damascus. And he appeared to him not for the purpose of saving him. He was to go into the city and hear the gospel whereby he would be saved. We've talked about that recently in a study. The Lord appeared to him to call him to be an apostle. But I want you to notice at verse 6. Let's back up to verse 4. He heard a voice saying, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And in verse 5 he said, who are you, Lord? And he said, I am Jesus whom you are persecuting. It is hard for you to kick against the goads. Now, verse 6 is where our question is. So he, trembling and astonished, said, Lord, what do you want me to do? That's a good question, isn't it? That's well worth asking. Lord, what do you want me to do? The question is not, what do I want to do? Lord, what do I want to do? What direction do I want to go? How do I want to live my life? The question is not, what do others expect of me? What does my family expect of me? What does the church expect of me? What is the world expecting of me? The question was, Lord, what do you want me to do? Lord, what do you want me to do in worship? When do you want me to worship? How often do you want me to worship? Lord, what do you want me to do? What do you want me to do toward others? How do you want me to treat them? How do you want me to behave around them? How do you want me to respond to them? How do you want me to deal with their problems? Lord, what do you want me to do? What do you want me to do in my family? What do you want me to do as the husband? What do you want me to do as the wife? What do you want me to do as the parent? What do you want me to do as the child? Lord, what do you want me to do? Not what do I want to do, what do you want me to do? Let's back up a chapter now to Acts chapter 8. This is in the story of the conversion of the eunuch. He's riding along, reading from Isaiah the prophet. We've studied this account of the conversion recently. He's reading from Isaiah 53. God sends Philip to join him, and as Philip joins him, he hears him reading from Isaiah the prophet, and he asks him, do you understand what you are reading? That's a good question to ask, isn't it? Do you understand what you are reading? I don't know about you, but I don't always understand everything I read. There are things that I can read and I can understand the terms, but I'm not understanding how they all relate to one another. I'm not understanding the message I'm getting or supposed to get. I might need a little help. And here was a man reading from Isaiah the prophet, and he said, how can I accept someone guide me? You see, it's not enough to read the word. I need to know and understand. Some people take pride that they read, and I've read all through the Scriptures. I read the Scriptures through twice in a year, someone may say. That's great and that's wonderful. Do you know what you read, and do you understand what you read? Do you understand what you're reading? You see, you may need someone to guide you, as the Ethiopian treasurer said. In other words, you might need a little help. He thought he needed a little help. I need someone to explain what Isaiah 53 is about, and that's exactly what Philip did. You may need someone to teach you the sense. Do you remember in Nehemiah chapter 8, Ezra read from the Scriptures, and he had teachers with him, and they read and they gave the sense. What does that mean? They simply explained, here's what that means. Here's what the law says. Here's how it fits your life. This is what it means you're to be doing. I may need someone to help me to understand and show me from the context, you know what, this is what the text means, and here's how it fits your life, and here's the sense of that. Do you understand what you're reading? Do you try to understand the text in its context? When you prepare for Bible class and you read a text like from the book of Exodus, or you read a text from the book of Mark as we're studying now, do you read through that without any intent of trying to understand the text in its context? Do you come to Bible class with the expectation, I want to learn the text in its context. I want to see exactly what it's saying. Do you understand what you're reading? That's a good question, isn't it? That was raised by man, but it's a good question. Here's a question raised in these two passages, in Matthew chapter 26 and verse 22, and Mark 14 and in verse 19. And this is the occasion when the Lord said, one would betray you. One of you will betray me. One of you sitting here tonight will betray me. And each one of them began to raise the question, Lord, is it I? And the next one would say, Lord, is it I? Is it me? And another one would say, Lord, is it I? Am I the one you're talking about? That's a powerful question. That's worth asking. You see, what they're doing is making personal application to what the Lord said. The Lord had given a danger. The Lord had talked about a warning. Lord, does that apply to me? Lord, does that fit me? They're making personal application. That's what we should do. Does it apply to me somehow? Is this warning applicable to me? When someone should tell others the gospel, someone should share the gospel with them, someone should influence them with the gospel. The question is it I? Am I the one that should do that? Maybe I need to make application of that. That maybe that's talking about me. You see, when we look at a text, it tells me that some people could be drifting. And there's warning given, people are drifting from the word. Well, Lord, is it I? Am I the one that's drifting? Maybe I'm drifting in my thinking. Maybe I'm drifting in my belief. Maybe I'm drifting in my practice. Is it me? Am I the one? When there's challenges given that someone could do better, the question should be, Lord, is it me? Maybe I'm the one that could do better. I can think of some others, but maybe I'm the one that I need to think about that could do better. Lord, is it I? Maybe someone needs to say, you know what, I'm the one that's wrong. I was wrong in this case. Lord, is it I? Am I the one that should say that? Was I the one that did the wrong? That's a good question to raise. Lord, is it I? Let's go to Acts chapter 22, back to the conversion of Saul. Back to the conversion of Saul. Remember, I mentioned a moment ago that the Lord told him to go into the city and it'd be told him what he should do. And there in the city, he runs into the preacher named Ananias. And notice at Acts 22 and in verse 16 that when Ananias came to him, he said, and now why are you waiting? Why are you tarrying? The New King James renders that, and now why are you waiting? Arise and be baptized and wash away your sins, calling on the name of the Lord. That's a powerful question, isn't it? See, that was raised by Ananias. Why are you waiting? Why are you delaying? See, why do you wait when you know there's a need in your life? See, if you're needing to obey the gospel and become a child of God, you're not a Christian, why are you waiting on that when you see there's a need in your life, that you're lost and separated from God? When you're an erring child of God and you need to make correction, what are you waiting on when you see there is a need? What are you waiting on when you know what that need is and you know what you need to do? You say, well, I don't understand. Well, all right, if you don't understand, maybe you need to be taught. But if you do understand, here's what I need to do. I know exactly what I need to do to become a Christian. I know what I need to do to make correction in my life. What are you waiting on? Why do you wait when you know what you need to do? What are you waiting on when you have no promise of another day? You say, I think I'm going to make some correction in my life, make some changes in my life, maybe another week. You don't know that you'll have another week. You have no promise of another day. Why are you waiting when you don't have a promise? Why are you waiting when you can be forgiven of every sin that you've committed even this very evening? Why are you waiting? Powerful question. That's worth asking, isn't it? Well, let's now shift gears. We've talked about questions that have been asked by God, some questions that have been asked by men. Let's talk about some questions we should ask ourselves. We need to turn around and ask ourselves some questions. God has asked us some. Other men may ask us some. We ought to ask ourselves some questions. Let's go to Matthew chapter 10 and in verse 37. This morning we looked at the parallel account to this in Luke. We alluded to this account in Matthew 10. But let's look now at verse 37. There's not a question here. We're going to form a question. We'll ask ourselves based on this text. He that loves father and mother more than me is not worthy of me. Well, that makes us ponder a question now. We need to ask ourselves, do you love God or family more? That's worth asking, isn't it? Ask yourself, do I love God or do I love family more? Which do I love the most? How does that apply? Well, when there is a conflict between family and God, which do you choose? When you look to the Scripture and you say, I know what it says, and here's what family is doing, here's what family says, and here's what they believe, which one of those will you choose to go with? Some obviously choose family. If you're following God, that may mean that you're cut off from your family. Or you may have to cut some family off. Could you do it? If following God meant that you have to cut away from your family and separate from your family and have little to do with your family, could you do that? No, I couldn't do it, you say. That's a powerful question, then. then maybe we love family more than God. Do you love family or God more? That's a tough question to answer sometimes. Could you take a stand against family members? That's hard. That's not easy to do. Could you take a stand against parents that are not living in harmony with the will of God? Could you take a stand against children that are not living in harmony with the will of God? Could you take a stand against grandparents or against aunts and uncles? Siblings that are not living in harmony with the will of God. That's not easy. Let's go back to our text, verse 37. He that loves father and mother more than me is not worthy of me. Do you love God or family more? Will you always stand with family because they're family? Blood's thicker than water. I believe I need to stick with family, someone says. Or you say, no, I'm going to stick with God if there's a contrast between God and family. That's a question worth asking, isn't it? Here's another question. Let's go to 1 Corinthians chapter 3 and in verse 7. The question is not raised there, but we're going to lay again a principle and then form a question from that. This is a passage talking about love. And the passage tells us what love is and what love will do. And it says at verse 7, love bears all things and believes all things. That doesn't mean love is gullible. Some translations will render that it gives the benefit of the doubt. And that's exactly what it means. Love gives the benefit of the doubt. Well, keep that in mind, and let's turn over to Proverbs. Let's go to the 18th division of Proverbs and look at verse 17. Actually, I want to look at verse 13 and 17. Verse 13, he who answers a matter before he hears it, it's folly and shame. That is, you draw conclusions before you have all the data, all the information. That's foolish. Now then, verse 17, the first one to plead his cause seems right until his neighbor comes and examines him. When you hear one side of the story, sounds like it's right until you get the other side of the story and you find out, you know what, there's two sides, or at least, if not three, to the story. So here's the question we're going to ask. Do you give others the benefit of the doubt? That's a tough question, isn't it? You see, we want others to give us the benefit of the doubt, don't we? You see, if there's any question, I want people to give me the benefit of the doubt. Well, then should I not give others the benefit of the doubt? You see, if something doesn't look good, do you believe the worst at the first moment? You see or you hear some story about some brother in the Lord or sister in the Lord, or you see something and you're not sure what you saw, and it could be bad or it may not be what you really thought, but you're trying to figure it all out. Do you think the worst first and assume the worst? Or do you give them the benefit of the doubt? Good question. Do you jump to the conclusion you want rather than the conclusion the evidence drives? I'd like to think they did wrong, so I've got a hammer to beat them with. So that's what I was wanting. I wanted to do that. I'm looking for that. Or is it that I jump to the conclusion that the evidence drove to? Do you jump to conclusions? Do you give others the benefit of the doubt? Do you mark people off on shallow evidence? You're done with them. And there's really not much evidence there. It's just kind of shallow. Or did you give them the benefit of the doubt? Are you the kind of person that wants to know more before you draw conclusions? You said that might be, this conclusion may be correct, but I want more data before I draw my conclusions. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. That's a question worth asking, isn't it? Let's go to Acts 5 and in verse 28. When the apostles were called into question before the Sanhedrin, here was the charge that was made. You have filled Jerusalem with your doctrine. You think about that. They didn't just say, you're teaching some things we don't like. We don't agree with what you're saying. Their charge was, you have filled Jerusalem with your doctrine. Here's a question we want to raise. Have we filled Chevel with our doctrine? Have we filled this city with our doctrine? In other words, if it were to be against the law to teach the gospel to others, would there be enough evidence to convict us? Would you be one of the ones that would be arrested? If someone marched in here and said, we're going to arrest a bunch of you and we've got some names here, would you be afraid your name's on the list? Because here's the charge. You people have filled this entire city with the doctrine that you believe. Not only on your website, but individually, you've been teaching your friends and neighbors, you've been teaching the gospel to people, and that's against the law, and you have filled this city with your doctrine. Would there be enough evidence? Would you be afraid that maybe your name's on the list? Or would you say, well, I know I'm not on that list. There's some people around here who do that, but I'm not on that list, I know. If criticism were made of us, would they be saying, we have filled this city with our doctrine? What a charge to be made. Or would people say, well, we know where you stand. We've heard some things, we've seen some things, and we said it's all a little bit on Facebook, but I wouldn't say you have filled the city with your doctrine. If that charge couldn't be made, maybe it ought to be made. Maybe we should make it where they would make that charge, that we have filled the city with our doctrine. Let's go again now to two passages, one in the Sermon on the Mount, and then we'll go again to Romans chapter 14. Matthew 5 and in verse 9, in the Beatitudes, Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers. And he doesn't raise a question there. He just said, blessed are the peacemakers. In other words, here's a quality of those who make up the kingdom. One of the qualities is they are peacemakers. Romans 14 in the context where there's controversy over the matter of eating of meats, whether you should or shouldn't, and is it against your conscience, follow after things which make for peace. Follow the peaceful course. So here's the question. Are you a peacemaker? Would that phrase be attached to you? You say, well, it should be to all Christians. That wasn't the question. It should be attached to every one of us. But if someone were describing you individually, would they describe you as this person, this man, this woman is a peacemaker? That's the kind of person they are. They're exactly what Jesus talked about. So what does that mean? Do you try to get along with others? Do you make efforts to get along even with those that don't try to get along with you? When there's more than one path you could follow this path, and that's going to be the peaceful path where you get along with others, and then here is the one that agitates everybody and gets things all stirred up. Which path would you follow? Which one do you normally follow? Are you a peacemaker? Do you do things that you know will agitate people? Well, I'm not talking about you live the Christian life and that agitates your family. You stand for the truth and that agitates some of your friends. We're not talking about that. We're talking about attitudes and actions that have to do with judgment calls. Do you follow after that course that agitates people around you? And you're constantly stirring them up. Do you reach out to your enemy? The one that is set to destroy you, that person that is set out to do anything they can contrary to you. That's what Romans 12 is about, by the way. As much as it is possible, live peaceably with all men, verse 18 of that text says. Put every effort forth to get along with others. Is that the course you follow? Do you reach out to your enemy and say, what can we do to resolve? What can I do to get along with you? I don't want to be your enemy. Do you do good things toward those that are your enemy? When they refuse to shake your hand, do you reach out and try to shake hands with them? At least show a good gesture toward them? Are you a peacemaker? Let's go again to 1 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 12. Paul said, be thou an example of the believer. Paul told Timothy, you be an example of those who are believers. Now, he didn't raise a question there. So let's raise one about that. What if others followed your example? I didn't ask, are you an example? We're all an example. But what if other people followed your example? And what if everybody else in the church became just like you? What would this church be like? Would others in this church be considered diligent because they're just like you? They followed your example. They've been watching you and they've imitated you. They're following right in your footsteps. Because watching you, they thought that was what a Christian is all about, and they're trying to imitate you and be just like you. Because that's what Paul's telling Timothy to be. Be that kind of person when they follow right behind your footsteps, they're doing exactly the right thing. Would others in the church be considered diligent because they're following your example? Would they attend all of the time? Would they be respected by others? Would people hold them in esteem and respect them for their diligence? Could others count on them? Could we count on everybody else in the church if they were just like you? Could when we ask for something to be done, you can count on it being done? Or would it be they're not going to do whatever they're asked to do? You see, there are a number of questions that are asked by God, a number of questions asked by men. There are a number of questions we need to be asking ourselves. There are questions that certainly are worth asking. And we need to ask and we need to answer. Let me ask two more questions. Would you become a Christian tonight if you're not one? That's certainly worth asking. If you're not a Christian, would you become one this evening? Let me ask another question. Would you correct your life if you're an erring child of God? Would you do that tonight? Oh, that's certainly worth asking, isn't it? What if this were the only opportunity you had left? Would you correct your life even tonight? There may be one or more present this evening who's not a Christian, who's not a child of God. Would you come believing that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God? Would you repent of your sins, acknowledge your faith in Christ, and be buried in the waters of baptism for the remission of sins? If you're subject in any way, would you come while together we stand and sing?